Hi everyone, welcome back to Redefine the Circle. I'm Ashley Sunshine, co-owner and head of pitching development here at OGX. Sitting next to our very own Ryker Chason in the flesh. Yes, so a lot of times when Ryker and I, because we're not always in the same place, we're usually not, we'll shoot our episodes virtually, which is cool. But we're like energy people. So to be feeding off of each other's energy in person, I dig it.
Me too.
Yep.
I'm happy to be back in Chicago.
Totally. Okay, so here is, I'm just noticing, I'm nervous about the way this tripod is set up. So if this comes crashing down, sorry about that. But we'll let it roll. Today's episode, we are going to talk about recruiting. And I think we did one before that was about recruiting, but this is different lens. This is about, okay, let's speak to college coaches in this episode.
Yeah.
About what lens maybe you should have, or how the different ways to be successful in recruiting.
Yeah.
When you're out there in what I like to often call the wild, wild west.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one.
You're so tired. We've already kind of covered this last one. You're so exhausted from your own season.
Yeah.
A lot of recruiting is, yes, you're like fighting for what you need, but also it's kind of like a keeping up with the Joneses. You got to show face.
Yeah.
Because even if you want a kid, if you don't show up, it's like, that's kind of the stuff we talked about last time.
Yeah.
So let's go at like the strategic thing, like how do you identify pitchers, of course, this is Redefine the Circle.
Yeah.
So let's start with the easy tier. Let's start with the tier of how you identifying someone who's good. They've got stuff.
Yeah.
How do you know they have stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. They're the stuff. They're the unicorn, as we like to say.
Yeah, they just, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're showing up to games, right? And there's a ton of swing and miss. There's probably multiple spin directions. There's an off speed in there, and everyone's there. And that's how you know. You just know, like, that kid's really good. She's elite.
They're catching your eye.
And they're
catching everyone else's. And that's great for that kid. Kudos for you. And what we know on the flip side, data is probably not available in that game.
Yeah.
But what we know likely, if it's like that kid has stuff, is that she probably has 2 strengths and an off speed maybe.
Yeah.
Or one real nasty one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, she's doing things like she's throwing top spin, throwing back spin, both probably in a elite category, right? Like +3 to 5, -7 or 8.
Yeah.
And she's probably throwing an off speed that blends off of those. And she's probably throwing high velo too. The really the good unicorns are probably throwing in the upper 60s. So
yeah. Or maybe just one break category with upper 60s.
Yeah, with high
the velo kids I think really stand out in the summer because everyone's exhausted.
Yeah.
So
it's just like, ooh, that's hard.
Right. So even the actual high velo kids in college aren't high velo in their high school junior year summer because they're just like tanked.
Yeah, no. So they're throwing high velo in like the mid to late summer, when they've played, coming off of a whole high school season, going into travel ball without really a break. If they're throwing high velo then you know that in the college environment where we are with most of our athletes and the staffs, the colleges that we work with, the staffs they have, that they're able to preserve that kid where she can throw high velo all the time. Hopefully all season. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the obvious tier. That's like you could spend your summer identifying the people that everyone else is identifying.
Well, there's not a lot of them, though. It's the thing.
For sure.
Not a lot of them, and there's not a lot of people who get them.
Exactly. And what I think is really interesting for you to weigh in. So obviously you're coming from the SEC world. Yeah. So for a lot of coaches who maybe are at, a conference that's lower, which is almost every other one, right? Yeah. Essentially, you're like a mid-tier, mid-major or something. They're like, okay, well, that's, you belong recruiting anyone. But you often found yourself, especially when you first got to Ole Miss, that like, if I'm on a field looking at someone that the rest of the SEC is looking at, I'm likely not going to get her. Now, you may have won her over with your personality and your charm, but but I mean, like you knew, like I have to dig deeper, which is something I think is was remarkable about you and how you identified. So that's really what I want to get into. So like, okay, if you knew, hey, I'll throw my hat in that ring with this kid, but I can't bank on it.
Sure.
Because X, Y, Z, ABC is also going after her. And where my program is at the time, maybe it's just where you are, you're a mid-major, or maybe it's just that you're a Power 5, but you're lower in the conference.
Yeah.
So then what do you do?
Yeah, you got to go find the kids that have something. I think like the next bucket that we talk about often is like the one tool kid. They have one thing that is makes them special, which is they may have like a really good down ball, right? And they throw with enough velo for that to play. Or they may have like really good backspin. or, you know, maybe they throw high velo and that's their one tool. It's not, it's, maybe it's bullet, there's not a lot of break, but that's their one tool. And you have to go find those one tool kids. But to be very honest with you, often, you know, the one tool kids are still getting recruited by really, really high level schools. And I found myself, you know, not even when I first got to Ole Miss, actually not even probably being able to get the one tool kids.
Yeah.
The kids who were not studs. And I was like, oh, okay, so we got to go, you know, even
Below
a little
that.
deeper here, you know?
Yeah.
So that was interesting. I think a couple things come to mind when you start saying about my time at Ole Miss. I recruited a kid, Caitlin Rowley. It was COVID. And when I got the job in 2020, it was COVID. And I actually recruited her over live stream. You know, it was when like the athletes go live or whatever.
You saw they're like this big on the screen. You're like, looks good to me.
Yeah. And I recruited over athletes go live. And when I got the job, we didn't have a 21 arm. The 21 arm that they had decommitted when the previous pitching coach left, and so didn't have a 21 arm and knew we needed somebody. And so seen this kid. She's big. She's strong. She's physical. She kind of got missed a little bit in the her first recruiting process, and she wound up committing to a mid-major school, which is a good mid-major school. And, you know, she got paid to go there and all those things, but she got missed a little bit on the bigger recruiting scene. And their head coach left, and so she was kind of looking for somewhere to go. And I just got the job, and she was big and she was strong. And I talked to her, and she was like tough. It was like the other things, you know.
Yeah.
And then I didn't realize when I got her, I was like, wow, this kid is untapped. And you guys came in. That was the first year that you came in when you guys were asked to break through, and you came in and did assessments, and you looked at me and you said this, and this has stuck with me since.
I know, because you brought it up to me. I'm like, I don't even remember saying that.
Yeah. Like, no, you said this, and you said, always take the kid with high power and low movement quality because you can train her.
Yeah.
She has in the tank what she needs to be able to accomplish some things, but she doesn't understand how to quite move. And if you can understand those things and tap in, and obviously I was in the right place with having you guys, then you can train. And I just seen that kid, man, take off like a rocket. You know, like she didn't have anything really when she got there. I mean, she had like some bullet, a little bit of top spin, but like, and was throwing like low to mid 60, 64, 65. But man, I mean, within a month, she was throwing a -7 drop ball at 68 plus. You know, she just took off right away and just continued to develop things. That's like stuck with me. So that's really when I started to learn about, I guess, recruiting, you know, in a sense of how we're talking about now. It's like, okay, you know, this kid wasn't recruited by anybody in the SEC, but where she's at now, she's our best arm, essentially. She's throwing all of our big games, you know, by the time she's a sophomore. So, and then another one that really opened my eyes, Ainsley Burbush, too. Like when I first got the job at Ole Miss, I mean, it was all bullet, and there wasn't that much there. And, you know, we really had to, like, instead of at first I tried to give her all the things, right? And then I like pulled all the things away from her. I was like, she can be the one tool kid. Let's just go after backspin. And she did. It took a while, right?
Yeah.
But she eventually got to a place where, you know, she threw 100 innings her junior year for us, and just had one tool, the backspin. So then that shifted my mind for recruiting. I'm like, okay, maybe I don't have to get the one tool kids that already have the tool. Because again, there's not enough unicorns. There's really even the one tool, the special one tool kids. Yeah. So what's the next layer? Yeah. And it was like, okay, these are the kids who
they don't have it yet.
No, and you got to have the vision.
Yeah.
Right. And so what does that look like? And started to try to dig before I could really dig deep and, you know, maybe get them to camp and assess some things for movement or power. I started to just kind of look around and like, okay, you know, this kid looks big, this kid looks strong, this kid's throwing hard. You know, this kid, I like her arm action. She's in a really good spot. She has really strong trunk arm timing. I started to like really dive in and look at those things. Like maybe they weren't getting all the swing and miss and the outs and the attention, but there was something there that I felt like that I could develop.
Those two athletes in particular had pretty clean patterns too. Yeah, so I think I remember this conversation about Caitlin where it was like, okay, she has power through the roof. And so like she is going to be able to keep climbing. You know, she's already thrown a decent velo, but she's going to climb. And she's just like raw. And so it wasn't coming through in ball flight because her patterns were so raw. But I think of raw as like, but it's preserved, meaning she didn't have these crazy compensations and therefore this crazy health history and such, right? So it's like her patterns are raw. They're not tapped into. Yeah. When you go after it, you're going to be able to help her create a lot on the ball. And like, I mean, geez, she was able to create big time up, big time down, all kinds of stuff, right? So she became a stud. She became an ace. And so it was like this raw nature, clean. You were seeing like there wasn't a lot to undo with
No,
those
no,
athletes. There was just something to build.
You
I
just
think
needed something.
right. And so if you're listening to this and you're in the youth world, you're an athlete, parents, etc., like preserving the raw nature
Yeah.
is like, oh my gosh, if you can do that and you can like put off the pitching motion, like beating you into the ground by the time you're 14 and your patterns are, your neck position's here and your arm is here and you're splitting. And not to say that can't yield something interesting.
Sure.
But these kids are relatively clean. They just weren't enough yet.
Yeah.
And you were like, I know that I can do something. So you have to have either the skill sets yourself to know how to develop.
Yep.
And we've heard from coaches before, like, I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
We see kids develop,
Yeah,
within a year. Yes, you do. If you know how to
systems.
Yes, if you know how to do it, you have 4 years with an athlete.
And it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't
Right.
happen overnight. Kate was a little bit quicker.
Right.
She really took off. She was a little bit quicker. But if you have the right systems, I think, it does happen. She threw some freshman year, and by sophomore year, she was ready to go. Ainsley was a little bit longer. She was probably, I think she threw 10 innings as a freshman. Then as a sophomore, she threw 40. And by the time she was a junior, she won, 10 games in preseason for us. She was huge.
So there's this category of, there's the ace.
Yep.
Godspeed getting that kid.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there's the category of go after someone who just has one good thing and just keep putting your pieces together.
Yeah.
And then what we're talking about is this category of the kid that's not quite there. And everyone's like, her command's not there. She's not throwing hard enough. That drop ball's getting hit. But you're like, but it's right there.
Yeah. There's something there.
It's right there. And I see her not as a finished product, but I see her as a 17-year-old, a 16-year-old. And I'm like, man, if we get her, we have a lot of coaches now that we have relationships with. They even send their athletes to us. Yeah. They're like, she's not there, but before she gets here, I'm going to, they don't send her, but they'll recommend, that's all they can do, but recommend that she start this like development journey.
Yeah.
And so that's a bucket of like when you are going to tap into something and help build something that doesn't already exist. To me, I'm like, I think that's like the most powerful piece because this is now where there aren't enough athletes in those other buckets.
No.
And so
there's more kids in they're not there yet bucket.
Right. If you start tapping in as a college coach into the I can turn someone who's just average and isn't getting noticed into someone that's big time.
Yeah.
And we watch coaches do it all the time.
Yeah. When
you develop that ability, it's like this is when mid-majors start pushing up against the Power 5 programs because it's like this is to me like an unstoppable category. It's not easy.
No.
And it takes probably more than just like a single coach who's very good. This is where obviously like we try to keep educating, whether we're working with coaches directly, we're pushing out information, we're trying to help coaches leverage data, technology, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But what a powerful bucket.
Oh man. Like it took a lot, it's like when I was there, I threw individual bullpens with those kids. I videoed every plyo that they threw. We watched, kudos to those kids because some days they wanted to look at me and be like, Ryker, get off my back, but
right. Yeah.
The ability to stay on them and have them buy in and start to see them have success, they seen it. They seen the growth and it was undeniable. It's what we say all the time. It was objective data. And we started to see things grow and we started to see success and it was really cool. And so it was those kids eventually that when I seen, Kate and Ainsley and those guys start to be successful, was when I realized like, okay, I got to go watch these kids from recruiting too. Because like I said, even in year 2 and year 3, when I was at Ole Miss, like it wasn't like everybody was beating down our door. Now we had some kids who were really interested because Oxford was a cool place and all of those things, but not because we were at the tippy top of getting all the recruits and the best pitchers. So I just felt like I needed to go. And what I started to see myself doing is instead of following this happens a lot in recruiting, you have your like couple travel ball coaches and teams that you rely on to like tell you about people that are on their teams or teams that they play. And then you're like looking at, the list of athletes that, all these people put out. And what I found myself starting to do instead of relying so much on that, I would wander around the ballpark. Just kind of wander around the ballpark. People probably like, what is Ryker doing over there? Watching watching that team. And I would try to wander around the ballpark and find those kids, and all of them. But I would definitely be looking for the things that I was talking about like, did somebody have something that out from the outside looking in, like look like they would have insane power or they were just a little bit raw and under tapped. and they had really good trunk arm timing or really clean patterns, and there just wasn't a lot of ball flight. I started to look for those things. I found a couple kids, and those were the kids that I really pushed hard to, like, I need to get you to camp. I need to get you on campus with us so I can start to just, not like a full, in-depth assessment, but a little bit of movement, ask them to do some things, test stability. I would always get their power when they were at camp. I would get their ball flight. I would start to tinker, ask them to do things, and keep up with them. And then those are the kids that I pushed to come here.
Yeah.
I was like, I need some more information on you. So I would like kind of push those kids to come here and get a more in-depth assessment so I could start to, recruiting is gambling.
Yeah.
You're gambling. You're hoping that you're paying somebody that's gonna,
will pay off,
pay you back,
Yeah.
And I just felt like I got to a place where I could start to make more educated decisions and more educated gambling.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. Obviously I love this world because this is what we do at OGX, or the player development people. But I just think that the reason why you're never going to see me like, I can't wait for next episode when we talk about the portal. The portal has its purpose.
Yeah.
But to me, I'm just like, it's not like in my soul, because I think what you're looking for in the portal is just like, I need X, let's go get X. End of story.
Yeah.
It's transaction.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it's about. And there's a place for that in the game. There has to be.
Yeah. And we hope those kids wind up at a place with someone
100%
to develop them.
100%. But the reality is, where I feel like anytime we have a college coach that's looking for a pitching coach, a head coach looking for a pitching coach, and they, hey, do you have some names? We always give them names of people who are in player development space.
Absolutely.
Because the power that coaches hold when they can take something average and turn it into something above average. Now, these are humans we're talking about, so I don't mean to talk about but I mean, they're able to take average skills and turn them into something above average. I know that takes buy-in. There's more than just, there's an art form to it. There's personality to it, all of that. But, these handful of coaches that we're learning that are starting to do a good job of that, I just think like, this is where it's at. Because there are a handful of schools that can just go around and get the best athletes out there.
Yeah.
But that is such a small fraction. So if you want to be a player, if you want your program to go and make a mark, in my mind, you have to develop that.
You do.
You really do. You have to develop, and not everybody's as good as others, but you have to have some sense of like, I can take someone who's average. Otherwise, in my mind, where you find yourself is you go for the kids on that top tier. Maybe every once in a while you get one.
Yeah.
And these days they probably transfer if they're really that good. No, but seriously,
Yeah.
Or you're like, oh, I didn't get her, so I'll just have average. And then you keep average.
Yeah. And then you don't advance anywhere, and then you don't win.
Yeah.
So when I showed up at Ole Miss, before Ainsley was there right away, but before Kate got there, and when I showed up at Ole Miss, like that was when I really it opened my eyes. I've been at LSU. I'll get a ton of talented pitchers in my time there. Carly Hoover, Allie Waldasper, just a ton of talented kids. And then I walked into a bullpen where their arm, who had thrown the most, she left. She transferred to Texas, Molly Jacobson, and Anna Morgan was there. She had not thrown a ton. I think she had just thrown a little bit, like her first 3 years there. And then Savannah Dietrich, who had not really thrown a ton. Ava Tillman had thrown more, but she had thrown more of like the midweeks and stuff. She hadn't been asked to throw in the SEC. And so I just was just like, these kids were not the same of the bullpen that I just walked out of. But man, those kids were eager. They were eager. I remember Anna Morgan like looking at him and being like, I'll throw with my right arm if you want me to, just to be able to pitch here. And so I just started to really dive in. So I got really, invested in you guys, and I started to really dive in and understand so many things about, Savannah was in this bucket of, she didn't really have a tool, but it was high velo, high spin rate, no real break. And I started to understand, you hear for so long, like bullet spin doesn't play. I started to understand how that played. And so when I went out and I seen kids that threw bullet, I'm like, I need to figure out this spin rate. I need to try to get some data on them so that I can understand like if this correlates. And then, for Anna, she falls into that bucket that we haven't quite talked about.
I know. That's what I want to get to next.
It's like, it's the odd bucket, right? Now, Ava was like a high velo kid who really developed some top spin, and she turned into like a one tool kid for us as down spin, and she did a great job. But it really started to open my mind up about recruiting, because I too was probably leaving LSU going into, I coached in travel ball, so I understood a lot about recruiting. I hadn't recruited myself, but I coached high level travel ball, and I want to say like a little snooty probably. I was kind of like, oh, that kid only has one pitch, or this kid only does that or does that. And I guess thinking that I was going to walk out there at 23.
Yeah, just like
Ole Miss and be like, all right, all the unicorns are coming to Ole Miss, and I figured that out real quick. That wasn't going to work. So
Yeah.
it really opened my eyes.
Because they don't exist. Like,
They don't.
so,
Yeah.
they're on one hand.
Yeah.
Two maybe, you know?
And
yeah.
I wasn't going to get them. And then I got real humbled and probably realized I wasn't going to get the one tool kids even that were, good enough to go to other places. So I started to, it was my own kids right in front of my eyes, developing them that taught me about what would play.
Yeah.
And that was when I really took that lens and continued to, Ainsley and Caitlin and all those guys and continued to take that out into recruiting.
Yeah. So good. Okay. The like other bucket that we talk about. So stud, everyone knows it. Everyone's out on the ball field.
Yeah.
One tool kid. She's a piece of your puzzle kid.
Sure.
We've got she's not there, but I can help her grow into what she needs to be. Like, she needs player development.
Yeah.
I will say one thing, the player development world, obviously we have a lot of high school athletes that are in that player development. And this is why we always say to them, you cannot go somewhere. If you reached where you are now through this place, you can't go somewhere that doesn't do player development, because you will slide back to you will. When I always say she's a player development kid, and everyone knows what I'm talking about.
Yep.
She's a player development kid. That means that, like, if she's not in a space that recognizes what player development is, how her patterns relate to her ball flight, what plyos do for her, what her weighted balls, what kind of weighted balls she needs, what pitches she's leaning into, how workload impacts her. Like, if people don't understand this world, you're not going to manage it perfectly. But if you don't understand that world at all, that kid's sliding back to her baseline.
Absolutely.
So keep that in mind when you're a player development kid. Okay, so that's the third bucket. Then there's just weird. Rose, like, she's weird. And we say weird because we mean it in a positive.
Positively, totally.
We like weird. I think Laura has...
I love weird.
I love weird. Laura has a sticker, I think, on the back of her phone that literally just says, stay weird.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why didn't you buy two? It's new. So I was like, did you just get this? She's like, yeah, I just got it. I'm like, why didn't you buy two? Because I want one for my phone. Stay weird. I love it.
So Laura.
Who wants to be average? No one. You want to be weird. That means you're different. You stand out. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but once I think it was in Savannah, Georgia, and I was just like, like strolling around shops, and there was something that was like quiet girls, or like average girls, like they never like make waves in the world. So it's something like, the way you think you want to be when you're younger, you just want to blend in.
Yeah.
You ain't making any waves later in life. You know what I mean? So I think it's the same concept. Like, don't go for I just look like everyone else. So this bucket of weird.
Yeah.
What do we mean by it?
Yeah. So the first person that comes to mind was Anna. Like, I didn't even know what she had. I got there and she's like, I throw curve, and I'm like, that's drop. Like, I was very in this one-dimensional space of like, this is curve, this is drop, this is rise, and I'm like, she throws drops. I try to get her to throw drop. I try to get her to do all these things, and I never knew what a flipped arm path was. I didn't know that. I don't even know that I looked at it. I don't know what it brought. And you told me, you're like, what do you want her to do? And I was like, I want her to be able to throw some different pitches and whatever. And you started to explain to me, what a flip arm path does. You're like, basically, by the time that she comes down and she's on the top of the ball and she flips back up, and then it's time to get the ball out, that is allowing her to do one thing. That one thing is funky. Like, and her patterns were kind of odd, and she like
so odd.
Was like very just rotational, and
she looked like she was gonna throw like in this direction, but it went in this direction.
Yeah, and then like her arm path was a little off, but then she would come down on top of the ball, she would flip it up and flip it back. That flip back at the last minute caused her to like cut the ball and gave her that like 4 inches into righties. She used to tear up righties. Yeah. And 4 inches in, and then she could go like 4 to 6 inches down, and she could locate the ball on a dime. Yeah. And you were basically, I would work with her all the time. I'd be like, all right, keep it up, keep it up, keep it up. We do all these drills and, crazy random stuff. Keep it up, keep it up, keep it up, and then let it go. And you were like, basically what you're going after is going to change your ball flight. And then she's just going to be average. Right. Because like this ball flight is just going to be average. And what she has right now is really rare.
Yeah, it's not extraordinary. No. It's just weird. Different. You don't see it a lot.
No, you don't. And so, and the fact that she could locate it, and like, okay, let's just try throwing off speed off of this. I mean, wow, watch that kid take off. Like, I freaking love that kid. She has my whole soul. And just take off and give SEC teams fit after fit and get big win after big win. And people are like, she throws 60, just hit it, whatever, 60 to 62, and just hit it, and, get off the plate. She's just going to throw it inside and whatever. And just to see her continue to go. And some days I had no clue why or how. And then I was just like, she's weird.
She's weird.
And I love it about her.
Totally.
And then that took me a whole new lens to recruiting. It was the kids that people were passing on because they're like, oh, she doesn't throw hard enough. The ball doesn't do enough. but the game was telling me
Yeah.
that it was good enough.
Yeah.
I would go watch her, and I would have to dig a little deeper, and watch those kids face, elite talent. And so many coaches would get turned off because they'd be like, "Oh, she made it one time, but then she got hammered." And I'm like, "Great, she made it one time.
Totally.
That's great. Like she's got some different stuff, and she made it one time to the lineup." And people would start to get turned off when they would get hit, or they didn't think it was like it didn't meet the requirements of what.
Yeah, they thought it should look like.
Yeah, and like what it should be. And so I took that whole lens into recruiting, and I'll never forget this day. This little girl shows up at Ole Miss camp, and she's just spinning the ball. Boy, I'm like watching her. She's warming up. I'm like, "What are you throwing?" She's like, "My fastball." Backspin.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Who the heck is this little kid?" And I said, "What's your name?" And she said, "I'm Hallie Burns from Boonville, Mississippi," like in that little accent. And I just thought she was the cutest thing.
Yeah.
And I just knew, I was watching her warm. I'm like, something's different here.
Yeah.
Get her data, high spin rate, 1800, 5 to 7 inches of backspin. She could angle it. First thing I do, make her a little more weird, right? I give her take her thumb off, give her a little off speed. It's like my signature.
Yeah.
And I just loved her.
You're like, if you have a pitch, it's getting an off speed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just loved her, and I thought, man, she's so different, like she come from this really low release height, and she just was super competitive, and her ball flight was rare, and she threw in upper 50s, and she just had this arm path that was a little bit strange, and I loved all the things that were different about her.
Yep.
And I was like, this kid can play here. She can play at Ole Miss. She can serve a role, and she can go after, the big power hitting righties that, I'm like, I tell her all the time, like, they can hit it as far as they want, as long as it stays inside the fence. You can pop up to deep outfield. I don't care. And she was somebody that I definitely took that lens on.
Yeah.
Like, it was different. It didn't necessarily pass the eye test for everybody. Now, every, junior college and, a lot of the mid-majors around Mississippi wanted her. Because they knew that definitely, based off her performance, really would scale to their level. But I seen something more there, and I'm like, this kid can absolutely compete in the SEC because it's weird. It's weird.
I think the weird bucket fires me up because I love it. Well, and I think it's one of the ones like we're like, she's weird. We always like when we see a kid, we're like weird.
When she's like in here having an assessment, and we're looking at each other.
Yeah, we're like so weird.
Yeah.
What's interesting about the work you have to do for the weird kids.
Yeah.
And we're not saying weird personality wise, which I also love.
Yeah.
But we're talking about weird like patterns, and then the ball flight does something that's really uncommon. You have to work to preserve them.
You do.
So I remember a conversation about Anna, where you were like something was like disconnecting.
She was in pain.
She was in
pain because you taught me about all the workload implications of flip or arm path and everything you put on the arm. Well, then she come back. She had some pain. We wound up having to shut her down a little bit. She came back and her ball flight was different, and she was getting hit hard.
Right, because
it called you like, Ashley,
what happened?
We're not okay. Riker's not okay.
Right.
It was not okay. And then we had to like honestly like understand. I had to like not reteach her, flip, but I never like initially like had to like overly explain it to her. It just was who she was, and it was natural to her. And then when it left is when we had to sit down and we like compared some video and we looked at data, and she really started to understand how she was accomplishing that. But if you don't understand that, then
it's like if you look cleaner, you might get worse. If you're a weird kid, what we call weird, we really mean this in like a very loving, endearing way.
Absolutely.
Okay, but if you're a weird kid, weird pitcher, if you clean up your patterns, you will likely make your ball flight worse. Like, you have to know that about yourself. Like, I'm in this bucket. I have to preserve that I do this. Is that efficient? Hell no. Like, it's not efficient.
No.
My velo is probably lower.
Yeah.
I mean, these kids are not high velo kids because their efficiency is low because their body's headed in this direction. Their arms flipping upside down. Their arm paths are around their head. Sometimes it's funky.
Yeah.
But they produce something. It's usually something with its arm side run. It's insane backspin, like a super high spin rate.
Yeah.
They can keep it through the zone. Like, it's something that's just odd and hitters don't see very often. So you have to preserve it.
When those kids are really young, we would probably like try to go after some things. If it were like arm path or crazy patterns that we thought was maybe going to get them hurt or something, because we feel like we could hear, in our space, help them, get ball flight that would be unique again in a more efficient and healthy way. Yes. But as these kids are older and they're getting recruited,
Yep.
And
manage the
they're
workload.
going into college, and they already have been doing this for so long, and you're like, this is a kid that falls in that bucket. Like, she has something.
Totally.
And you might really, really risk it if you go after her patterns.
Let's be honest. The weird kids are also probably more susceptible to pain.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the reality. Not saying every single one who's in a weird bucket has pain, but they're more susceptible to it because basically their body is in such a compromised position that what their arm does to compensate. And essentially most athletes, when their bodies really break down, their arms try to compensate and it just falls short and they don't produce anything. That's the majority of pitchers who have poor patterns. But then there's this bucket where despite the poor patterns, what they do with their arm action right at the last second allows for something super interesting.
Had one the other day in an
we
assessment.
did.
It was like,
we did.
You're like, you said this about her. You said she is absolutely maximizing what her patterns are capable of.
Yes.
The current patterns that she holds with the ball flight that she yields, it's like, you're like, wow, good for
right.
you. Girl.
So as a result, though, she's probably dealing with some arm pain.
She was, yeah.
Yeah.
She was.
And so what you have to understand is you have to understand that about yourself. As a coach, you have to understand about them. And their workload has to look different. It's those athletes are probably in-game workload probably will take care of itself. But we're talking about management of that workload in between games. It's like knowing I need to preserve that weirdness. I need to preserve that ball flight. But I think this bucket, I love it because I'm like, the game needs more of this, I think.
We need more people to take a chance on it.
Yeah.
Just because it doesn't look the traditional way. I think, what happens, nobody is scared to take a chance on velo. That's what I find in college recruiting. Nobody's scared to take a chance on velo. But his hitting has gotten better and better and better. We're looking around the country like, geez, all these runs.
Yeah, you're like 73 is getting hammered.
Right. And it's like, we're starting to see that get hit. I hope people open their eyes to like, okay, maybe I should take a chance on this kid that's like maybe low velo, but a little bit different and kind of funky, how she can pair with, maybe one of your other kids that is, maybe you got an ace, or maybe you got a one-tool kid that's really, really strong for you and how she can pair up with her.
Totally. We've had some like people in this weird bucket that we've trained for years. And I'm like, I'm having one in my mind and you probably know who it is.
Oh yeah.
She's in my soul. And when it came time for recruiting, I was just like, I think she belongs on any stage. Not I think. I know she belongs on any stage in the country. And getting coaches to it just was like because they're different.
Like something doesn't look right. And I'm like, oh, it's at the 7 inches of backspin.
Right. Yes. And it's so hard for coaches to really like take a chance. You're right on those athletes. And I just think we actually had another one in for college assessments come in, another athlete that I was like, this is like a weird case. And I asked her you obviously you're on the stage that you're on and you've had a lot of success at the youth level and you're having some, obviously a good amount of success at the college level. Like, did you know why? Just like, not really,
That's a really important piece is for the weird, for everybody.
Yeah.
But for the weird kids to understand their story.
Right. And and she was like, my goal, because this is everybody's goal, is I want to go up in velo.
Yeah.
And what I said to her is like, I think process this. Could we go after velo? Yeah, of course we could. But I think that might be pouring some fuel. Your arm's in a pretty compromised position, doing some really cool stuff.
Yep.
So we might be pouring. You have no pain because right now you throw 60, right?
Yep.
But if you throw 64, that might be different.
Gonna light that arm up a little bit.
Exactly. So that's one thing we're risking. And who cares how good you are if you're in pain because you can't play. And the other thing is the other way to go after, we could just make you stronger, more powerful and put fuel in the fire. That's risky. And on the other side of that, we could go after patterns. And we know on these weird arm path kids, you go after patterns. That's risky as hell.
It is because that is what influences the arm.
For sure.
Patterns are what influence the arm so strongly, and it's very, very rare that when you start to manipulate patterns of the arm doesn't change. I don't know that I've ever seen it happen actually. Yeah. And so it's risky.
It's totally risky. Yeah. Okay. So going out and recruiting, let's bring it back home. There's so many different ways to build athletes, and what we just don't want is to just most people are average, right? But in my mind, everyone can grow beyond where they are.
They absolutely can. I think we
talk
about this all the time. It's like if you're a baseball player, they're like, oh, he's in college or he's in high school. He's gonna, hit puberty, do all this and this. Oh, he's in college. He'll continue to develop as he gets into the minors. Okay, he's in the minors. Right. He's got time to get some majors and and he's 30. but we're asking young women to perform
15
at
years
their
old.
highest at 15
Yeah.
years old. It's crazy.
It is.
So I think we have to start to look a little bit deeper into what they possibly can be. It's why our assessment is, the way that it is. We start to assess movement quality and power and how those things link to the motion, and we track all their progress, and that's why, because we want to see them and want to make sure that our systems are actually making them develop.
Yeah.
And I think it's just people have to start to look at it a little bit differently. When you go out recruiting and you're standing behind the backstop, I challenge you to look, does this kid have 2 different spin directions, like interchange up? Okay, well then, everybody probably wants her, but or does she have one, or does she not have any? And go look from the side and see what you see, and watch
and start to categorize your own kids, as you said.
And
adjust.
What do you have, and what do you need?
And adjust workload based on what category
absolutely
they are.
Absolutely, this whole everybody on our staff throws 4 days a week deal is
are they getting what they get out of efficiency, or are they getting what they get out of weirdness?
Right.
I mean, that just bucket them in those two.
Because those two things can't work all the same.
Right. Yeah. I was just thinking, we had a parent of an athlete that trains. She's young, and she went to one of these conferences, where local conferences and colleges from all over the country, big names are there, and she had an opportunity to ask somebody a question. This is a school that has traditionally been one of the best in the in college, and she said, if my daughter is such and such age, she's 14 years old, and she still is developing, and she still basically how long can we preserve her? She still plays at a lower level and all this stuff. At what point do they need to cross the threshold? I think that's what the question was kind of geared toward. And the comment back was if you were going to play at on our level, she's in 8th grade, we would know about her already. And so that parent came to me concerned about that answer. This is a coach from a school that has been the best for 30 years, one of the best for 30 years, And so that makes me nervous. I'm hit the road with that feedback. I'm sorry. Yeah. You cannot tell me. Sorry. No, I'm not sorry at all. Sorry, not sorry. And you know what? No one is saying that coach is not successful, but he takes a very specific approach to who he gets, and that's fine. But that is not what we are saying.
No, it's not the mold for everyone.
That is not the approach that everyone should and can take.
No.
And so I think that's really where this is about. It's just there are so many different ways to build a really successful pitching staff.
Absolutely.
When it comes to recruiting. And traditionally, we've just taken the lead. It's why I'm never a huge fan of let's go to a conference, pitching conference. It's where we started Pitch Doc.
Yeah.
Let's go to a pitching conference and just put all the best. Not to say there's not a lot to learn from people who just win and win and win. Absolutely. I'm not saying that. But they live in a world most people don't.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how to be good when you live in a slightly different world.
Yeah. And I probably didn't even realize that going in Ole Miss that I was going to be living in. You're still in the SEC, but I was living in a totally different world than I was at LSU now. And I wasn't the pitching coach there. Obviously, it was a student assistant under Beth. But I just realized quickly, the world that she was then living in to the world that I was then living in was different. And I think, I just challenge people in recruiting, you got to get a bunch of different tools and different stuff.
Totally.
So you got to go get the righty down baller. You got to get the righty up baller. Maybe you can develop one of them another spin direction. You got to get the lefty. You got to get the deceptive changeup kid. Make sure you have a spinny kid. Get all these different things because hitters are good and a lot of offenses are different. You got to be able to provide different looks, and you got to know how to stack them and use them to help you win games.
Yeah. And keep educating yourself on how to do it.
Absolutely.
So I did not expect to be now let's shout out Pitch Doc, but we should, because basically this is it, right? This is what Pitch Doc is about let's talk about how to learn more, how to see pitching differently, to really go in to be able to be more educated on how to grow what you currently have, how to identify things that are different. That's at the heart.
And I think what's unique about my talk and, kind of one of the things we want to go into together.
Yeah.
My talk is being about, okay, obviously I was in that world.
Yeah.
I was in the college world. I use you guys for consulting, but now being here, we're coming up on, 9 months or so now.
Yeah.
In a while. But we're, now that I'm here, if I was to ever go back, I'm talking about the things that I would do, absolutely implement the systems, the best way to use the knowledge that I've gained here, which I think is really powerful for a lot of college coaches. And then, we got the YAC data.
Yeah.
And we're going to be kind of diving into, what's playing out there.
Yeah.
That's the world that we're kind of living in. Is we're assessing, Rapsodo data because that's what we have access to from training. And, then we're assuming essentially a little bit that data is holding in game. And the only way we've originally tested that is okay, we'll put your Rapsodo unit down when you're throwing live or your little scrimmages or something, and you're seeing your kids' data hold. But now we have actual in-game data
Yeah.
that we are going to be able to pull and look at and show like what were the actual outcomes when we're in these break and velo thresholds, and we're going to be able to identify these
the weird
and the studs and the one tool and how long it lasted and what the velo and what the break threshold might have to be, and like really dive into, you know, what is getting hitters out.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool.
It's so cool. It's like giving the weird a bigger platform.
Yeah.
Yeah. To
We
like,
love the weird.
we love the weird. Okay. That was great. I don't know if that's always, I thought it was great. I will see what the people listening think, but don't know if that was exactly the direction I thought we would take, but you never know when we start chatting.
Oh gosh.
We really leaned
You
into
don't
the
never
weird.
know when we start chatting in the car. Much less
Totally.
25.
We're like, did we pass where we're supposed to get all? But I would say we leaned into the weird bucket more than I anticipated, but that's because we love the weird bucket.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Absolutely.
And we love for them to know who they are, own who they are, lean into who they are.
That
It's
they have
just so
a place,
powerful.
a bigger place than what they think,
100%.
and that what anybody thinks they can do.
100%. Okay. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this. If not, we certainly did. So hopefully you did as well. But thanks for joining. Between now and next episode, remember, keep questing on to redefine the circle. Thanks, everyone.